Hey everyone, this is Aaron Stillwell. I'm the owner of the APT and Cybersecurity Group. Today we will be talking about safeguarding APIs for APTs. All right, and I'd like to welcome Shiraz Mehta. He is to our APT and Cybersecurity Group LinkedIn Live event. Shiraz is the CTO and founder of Sequence Security. He has tons of experience. I watched your 2022 interview, which was fantastic. So we're very excited today to kind of learn about APIs and the threat of APIs. But also with us to help me host is Alex Mavro, and I think David Cross should be joining on. As he should be joining on pretty soon, but I gotta check and kind of do this. So, but everyone, thank you so much for joining. If you see the click button for the chat, this is a LinkedIn Live event, so please ask questions live, and we'll definitely get to ask them. It kind of makes it definitely a more interesting presentation when we do it. So, Shransky, can you do me a favor and kind of give me a little background of yourself and a little bit about sequence security, and that'd be great.
Yeah, first of all, Aaron and Alex, thank you for having me here. I mean, always enjoy interactive sessions and learn from others as well as we chat over here. Um, uh, just a little bit of background about me. Again, my name is Shreyans Mehta, co-founder and chief technology officer at Sequence. Sequence is an API security and bot management company. And before starting Sequence, I spent 10 years at Symantec.
Okay.
So built
Not,
there.
not bad.
Sorry, did I?
Not bad. Not
Yeah,
bad.
yeah. I learned a lot there. I mean, it was at a point where I built the network security and the IDS and IPS protection technologies over there. A technology that accounted for more than 50% threats back then when I was at Symantec, blocking some of those threats. So a combination of deep packet inspection and a lot of machine learning across millions of and hundreds of millions of sort of endpoints that Symantec had back over there. So I've been in security business throughout my career, past 20-25 years now.
Awesome, Shreyansh, thank you, and David, thank you so much for joining us. We have David Cross, who's the CISO Oracle Cloud Services. David, thank you.
Absolutely. It's always exciting here into these joining the community, right? We always try to make a great interactive session. So
Awesome. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you. And I'll mention this one more time. Again, click the chat button for questions. We are live today. So I'll make sure I'll keep an eye on them. And then once the questions come up, we can start posting them. Then Shreyan's going to kind of ask them. But always the first question I'd like to ask here is, obviously our group is Advanced Persistent Threats and Cybersecurity. So, how are APIs, being used for APTs?
Yeah, I think we have to see the way the world has shifted in the last, I would say, 10 years or so, right? Like when I started this company Sequence, and back then, I think things were ramping up on the mobile app side. Like people were moving towards more and more apps, going from monoliths to these mobile interactions. IoT devices were popping up, and now we are.
I think did he just
Uh,
did he just freeze? Am I correct?
yeah.
Okay, so we'll just give it a second there. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Sorry about that. But David, I have to say, I love your suit jacket. Looks awesome.
look good, feel good. It's my philosophy.
Yeah, looking sharp. Okay, I think he's going to jump back on. Just one second. Let me make sure he gets there. There we go. There we
It's
go.
back.
Hey guys, sorry,
No,
technical
it's
challenge.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. So we were just chatting about APIs and APTs, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah. So my background, like I lived in the APT world even while at Symantec, and advanced persistent threats from our perspective was very different to now the new world, where everything now is driven by APIs, right? Like I literally call people that Tesla is not a car, but a four-wheeled app constantly communicating to the cloud over APIs, right?
Yep.
So from the attacker world, things have changed as well, right? Like in the sense that why not go into um, to assets and resources which are the least protected right now because the traditional defenses um, are not capable of protecting this new attack surface, and which is the majority of your internet traffic. So this is where we see most of the attacks coming in, and this is the world of the APTs as well, right? Like where you want to infiltrate, exfiltrate, all of that all happens over APIs right now.
Yeah. So another question, kind of like, how do API vulnerabilities, and we talk about in bot attacks, kind of intersect?
Yeah, so let me start with a story, and this is and it's a well-known breach in a large telco in Australia, and second largest carrier over there. They lost millions of customer data,
Yeah.
like their passport numbers, driver's license numbers, BII information. In fact, it was about one third of Australian population's data that was lost over an API breach, API-based breach. And uh, what really happened over there was some developer left testing API out in the public with
Mm.
minimal to no protection. Uh, and in fact, I believe there was actually no authentication out there. And while testing, he said, "Okay, let me try it out with the real customer data."
But
Um,
there is no compliance check, for example, or
well, developers
controls
will be
in place.
developers, right? I need to roll out a new app very quickly, and that's where I think we're going to talk about like with security teams. Why do we have to always play catch up here, right? Like because I mean we are using resources out in the cloud, right? I can bring up an app without security team's knowledge. I wanted to quickly test it. Is this feature working or not? And that particular API, like think of like when you log in, right? You typically fetch your own information using a customer ID number. Everybody gets a unique customer identifier, right?
Yeah.
Nobody thought, okay, I'm going to bring it up for a few hours, test it out and bring it down. Maybe that person forgot to bring it down. But the bad guys realized it very quickly that this API is available. Right? What they could do was actually enumerate through those customer ID numbers because it's a fixed pattern. It could be numeric, it could be some alphanumeric number, but I can actually write a tool to enumerate through IDs and fetch those information, right? So this is this is what breaches are all about, right? Like now guess what has happened here, right? Somebody rolled out a weak API, right, without the like the compliance checks and all those things that you were actually talking about, right? Because that developer was probably in a hurry or mistakenly connected to the real backend database. So this is an API security problem, right? Like why is an unauthenticated API out in the public exposing sensitive information, right? Now, for the bad guys, how do they attack this? Because okay, one or two drive records and okay, I mean it's still a big deal, but not that big deal, right? But if I can enumerate through millions of IDs, I'm not going to manually do this. I'm going to use a bot to actually do that.
Who
That's
can
how,
collect the data, right?
yeah, to exfiltrate the data, right? Try out each number. Not all numbers might be valid, but if I can run through millions and hundreds of millions of combinations, writing a bot, I can exfiltrate that. So that's where the combination of API security and bot comes into picture because you have to protect the entire life cycle. It's not just about the vulnerability; it's the exploit on that vulnerability that typically happens over a bot.
There are other type of exploitation types, for example. I mean, is okay. I understand most often it's AI plus exfiltration,
Yeah.
for of the API, but there are other types of this kind of exploitations
100%.
without AI, for example. I don't know. I'm asking.
Yeah, yeah. So think about like what is an API? API is your means to enabling your business, and every
Yeah,
business is different, right? Now,
true.
you financial industry, all your interactions, transactions, moving money,
Yeah,
like happens over APIs, right?
yeah,
Retail, you're buying stuff, you are returning items, all happening over APIs, right? Telcos, similar interaction. Now the abuse can be different in every vertical. What can I do in a so in that some of the common use cases across the board is, can I take over an account to get to the asset, so I can try to create fake accounts. I can try to get some money because there might be a promotion going on, right? Can I check in the retail industry? It could be about, can I check a gift card number combination, right? So it's now a data exfiltration, but if I can run through millions of gift card combinations, maybe I'll get tens of thousands of dollars in return, anything that matches, and I can resell in the secondary industry, right? So it really depends on the industry and vertical you are in, but everyone has its own set of challenges, and that's very unique compared to like a traditional security tools and things like that, right? Like where, okay, it can be exploited and abused in various different ways on top of APIs.
I see. And how can a business assess the security posture of their APIs if they want?
Yeah, so think of it as, like, again, we spoke about like there is a catch up to be done, right? Like now, like we moved from a world of monolith apps, right? Like there were only one or two entry points in that world, right? Two
Mhm.
people move to the cloud, multi-cloud, microservices. So what used to be like one or two entry points into their apps using APIs, guess how that communication is actually happening, right? To now the tens of thousands of APIs that are actually out there, right? Now, the question specifically around, I think compliance and also the posture, more around posture first before we get to compliance,
Yeah,
is you have to know where your assets are, right? Like, what as assets do I have? Where are they actually hosted? Which cloud environment? Which on-prem? Are they exposed to the outside world? Are they communicating internally? Or you yourself could be communicating to the outside world, because businesses are no longer like single entities that are self-contained, right? You have to
yeah,
check out using Stripe, you PayPal, whatever that might be, right? So knowing where those assets are is the starting point, right? Like, but then not all things are created equal. Not every API is the same. Which ones matter is which ones are externally exposed, which ones are exposing sensitive information, which ones are poorly authenticated or no authenticated at all, right? Which ones are my production environments versus test environment, right? So the creating that posture around it is super important, right? So that's where I think your question comes in, like
yeah,
how do I
yeah,
prioritize? Because not everything is created equal, and if I'm given a set of 10,000 API endpoints, can I can I start just looking at it the same way, or can I look at like first 5 or 10 APIs that matter to me the most?
I was going to ask. I have the one of the CISA certifications, right? And the big thing they talk about OT is having visibility, right, into your infrastructure, the products within the PLCs, the DCSs, and everything else. Is it the same true with the APIs, where the beginning stages are always about visibility, right? Or we need to know what we have out there, and then once we know what we have out there, what are the risks and the threats of it out there? Is that kind of similar?
Similar. I think the three-step journey applies everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Where are your assets, right? Like I cannot protect what I don't know exists, right? Like the fundamental rule, right? Like, because I could have gotten those assets because of, I have distributed development team, they roll out things at their own pace. I could have acquired companies. A lot of M&As happen, right? Or I could have old assets, people have moved on, but things are around, nobody shut them out, some shut them down, right? So knowing what you have, visibility is super important, right?
Yeah.
Then prioritizing is the next big thing, right? Because if you try to go after everything, it's gonna take you years to go after everything that is out there, right?
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then just visibility is not enough ultimately, right? Because ultimately they will get abused, and then you should be able to detect and stop that abuse. So it's the same journey. I think it applies not just to APIs, but as you said, right, like every CISO goes through the same journey for every asset that they might have.
Yeah.
But what are the best practices for secure the APIs against attacks? What do you recommend in this case?
So I think that I would say the same journey, and I can give you examples around this. I
Mhm.
think you have to, and we deal with a lot of large enterprises on our side, Fortune 500, Global 2000s. Um, like when we spoke about visibility, right? How do I catalog all these APIs, not manually, not asking the developers, because developers are constantly developing new APIs, rolling things out. They don't worry about security as much as you want. That I want developers to do their job, right? But they will miss because they're always under pressure to deliver faster. Uh, and there's a lot of catch up to be done in terms of creating an inventory of those assets. So being
Mhm.
able to automatically create that inventory is, I would say, the first big step, right?
Okay.
We had a few customers who came to us. They took a year and a half to manually put together a catalog of their APIs, right?
Wow.
Wow.
And these are like tens of thousands of APIs that they have, right? But guess what? In a year and a half, the world had moved on. Right? Right. So,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. That's a good question. Yeah. So, with the way it's moving and the speed of the development of these APIs, and obviously, it almost seems like the security teams, and David, you could probably talk about this, are fighting, not fighting, but trying to keep up with the business units because they're concerned about speed of putting the APIs out, right? They're concerned about the business and obviously making a profit. So has that been an issue with some of the customers you've seen where there's issues around the speed of what they need to put out versus the security?
this question for David, right? I think.
I can ask both. I can ask both. David, have you seen that too, where within, I guess, the business units with APIs they develop and they need to put it out quickly? Is there always an issue within these organizations of, okay, we need to put it out securely, but the business unit is fighting to put it out the fastest they can?
Well, I think this is the challenge for ongoing challenge, I think, for security and organizations, doing software development. But I think the one thing that I've been thinking about here, this morning in the call is how many actually businesses understand APIs, right? How many people understand actually how APIs work and the potential impact? You say developers kind of understand it, but how many business leaders, ops leaders, organizational leaders understanding
Right.
that?
Yeah.
And is that not one of the problems that we need to try to help in the community?
I completely agree. I completely agree because what we're realizing is think of it like a lot of these businesses, that the majority of the value actually comes in from these APIs. Like your like Thanksgiving sales, right? Like you've done billions of dollars of interactions over that, and those APIs, there's a big business value that comes up on top of that. And sometimes these businesses don't realize that part, that this is like a pipe that is enabling your businesses, right? What happens when some of the critical APIs that actually go down, right? Like, well, self-driving. What happens when on the interactions on the back end that are actually happening, right? So these are critical assets in your organizations, and a big revenue stream is actually dependent on this particular asset. And I think there is an awareness that needs to happen uh, around this for sure.
I remember you talked about in one of your last interviews, you talked about, it was Peloton and some of the other ones where there were attacks on it and the threats. Is there any other examples that you kind of know of out there that happened you could kind of talk about?
So I'll give an interesting example. It's a customer story, our own customer actually. It's a public case study. Um, Customer is Ulta Beauty, and what what we found is so if people, I mean, you have people listening across the globe here, right? Ulta Beauty is a large cosmetics retailer, brick and mortar as well as online, right? And interestingly, we found an activity on their APIs where so they have an API where you can say, okay, store locator API. I want to buy this item. Which store has this item available, right? And we saw a spike in their activity, significant high volume of traffic over a period of time, right? Like surprised, like what's actually happening in here? Like why would somebody care about identifying items somewhere, someplace, right? And what we realized after that was those interactions were actually coming in from bots, and those interactions were only looking for very specific items, um, very specific item, and these items were very high in value. Like, and these are Dyson hair curlers, and and typically the stores don't keep very high volume of items of inventory because these are high priced items. Uh, what we were able to map it to is in-store smash and grab robberies that were happening. So
Huh.
organized crime across. I mean, they have stores across the U.S., maybe across the globe as well. But what we know of, and what we were able to attach that pattern of somebody finding high-end Dyson uh, curlers where they are located across the US, and then eventually tying it to smash and grab robberies that were happening around that location. So these are kinds of things. I mean, this is not necessarily a breach, but this correlation how critical APIs are, and then what they can actually lead to as well.
It almost sounds like organized crime to me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah,
because it's very well planned at that point.
yeah,
But I think it's everything analyzed because if you want to, I mean, if you want to attack a company, if you want to attack a person, if you want to attack, let's say, a supplier and so on, uh, I think they have to know a lot of information. So before they are collecting the info about that person, that company, and then they prepare a scenario. This is how it
absolutely.
goes. I
Yeah,
mean, I have seen very often these kind of things through different clients and also through other friends who are working for other companies, and everything is prepared, and they know every detail. Even if, for example, I don't know, it's an example, vice president of that company or even the CEO went through, I don't know, whatever country, and then through that country they can steal all the details because they know in that country the internet service provider is not secure, or sometimes the CEO or the vice president of that company forgot to, let's say, use the MFA correctly, or to use the VPN or whatever tools they are using, and so on.
yeah. I think that kind of model of taking over accounts, reuse password, like business email compromise, getting over accounts, and then using that identity to commit other crimes. Absolutely, like this is like in some ways multi-step approach to the breach, right? Like that you're talking about.
I think I have read an article today about Microsoft MFA that is can be hacked in 1 hour. And that's one of the worst thing that I have seen. Yesterday or 3 days ago, I have seen another article about EDR solutions, how it can be hacked, and so on. Not all of them, of course, because some others are using VDR, which is visibility detection and response,
Yeah.
and which is a different one. Why? Because it's using a lot of AI, and nowadays even if you're a hacker or even if you're a threat actor that you want to, let's say, to breach that website or breach that company, it's not so easy because even the tools or software have been evolved. So this is what I'm saying. An XDR with VDR have been evolved through um, all these years, not days, but years. And I can give you some examples of these kind of tools, and you'll see that, or you'll put your question: how come can be done like that? Can be done, of course, but you need to have an AI powerful over there in your platform. That's the only thing, or else you'll end up by having obsolete technology,
Yeah.
and then yeah, it happens what it happens with most of the other companies where their EDR didn't work properly, not because it wasn't configured.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to also look at the sophistication of attackers, right? They are evolving, right?
Yeah,
What used to work 5 years ago no longer applies because the attackers have evolved, right? Now they have access to AI, they have access to large computing resources that, and they apply that, right? At least in our industry, especially around API security and protection, the we see most of the attackers don't no longer come from a single IP address, right? They try to behave like real users. They have captcha solvers available to them, right? Like they can actually um, kind of create bots that can solve captures. They can bypass some of these solutions, just like you spoke about MFAs. All
yeah,
the other defenses as well. They behave like humans in a lot of ways, right? And they have access to millions and millions of IP addresses, uh, because these are compromised home routers, proxy servers. They
indeed,
come
you're
from
right.
specific countries, and like if your business in a specific country, they're coming from those countries, and it's very hard to detect and prevent using, like you said, like EDR did not work, right? Same thing for
Yeah,
us, like a WAF or a traditional bot management tool in our space does not work, because there's no way to differentiate between a legitimate human versus a bot behaving like a human in this case.
Yeah, I can't resist sharing one on this point that you're raising about the getting legitimate APIs. Is what we're seeing is here's the insight of the week. I would say is that a lot of the attackers, they're basically getting uh, various mobile devices, right? And so they're running their attacks from these mobile devices. Like, oh, it looks like it's coming from T-Mobile or AT&T or Verizon and things like that. And so that's like, and they're moving around, like, so it looks legitimate, but it's very easy to get those short-term IPs from mobile devices and things like that. So, but I'd love to ask you a different question: is many organization businesses, right, in this problem space, how many can actually organizations actually building the skills and experience and tools internally versus relying upon third-party solutions to actually helping them? How many organizations can do this by themselves?
I think people start doing try so let's take a step back, right? Like in terms of, I think there is number one is there's a false sense of security out there. Like I have a WAF in place, I have a bot management tool in place, maybe it's taking care of all these things, right? So they invested in these technologies 5-10 years ago, and we spoke about is these technologies no longer work, right? So there is a false sense of security, and you're living in this world, I'm fine, right? Until a breach really happens, right? The new world that we're living in, the attack surface has moved on to these APIs, uh, and there is a skills gap, right? And this also speaks about the skills gap that is out there, right? I'm used to configuring a web application firewall using IPs and regexes, and but these attacks are very legitimate looking business logic attacks that are out there. uh, they're coming in, as we speak about it, I spoke about it, right, from millions of IP addresses that look like legitimate IPs. So doing it yourself has become very very hard, right? Like we if you might be able to solve part of the problem, But to holistically approach this, you need to have a network effect as well, right? What are others seeing in this market, right? How are these attackers transforming themselves? What tools do they have? Being able to keep up on your own, even if you have a team dedicated to it, is really, really hard, right? So that's why people, once they realize the pain point or they're burnt by a breach, they realize that I need a solution for this rather than trying to do it, solve it using traditional tools or trying to do this in-house.
Shiraz, have you noticed that companies are being more proactive with that lately?
I think yes, I think there is a sense of awareness now, and the bad part in some ways about security industry is we are reactive because do I need this another tool, do I need another solution? I
Yeah.
know, and when the breaches happen, oh my god, I didn't think about this thing, right? But in the last, if you look at last couple of years, there are so many breaches around APIs. There is an awareness now, right?
Yeah.
It needs to increase, no doubt about it, but I think in the last 2 years I've seen an uptick in awareness around this space. And part of it is obviously breach driven. You hear about it, oh my god, this, like we spoke about the telco in Australia, we spoke about some of the other like Peloton one that you spoke about earlier, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
And it
Experience,
comes,
Facebook, those, yep.
yeah, so I mean the list is endless, but I think that is creating awareness as well. I need to do something about it.
Yeah. Alex, David, did you have any questions here? I want to make sure I get you guys in.
Yeah, I might have a few questions as well. How does API security differ when deploying on cloud environments versus on-premise? Is it different? Is it more, it should be in a different way implemented and so on?
So when you said on-prem versus in cloud or wherever,
Yeah,
how are
yeah,
they different?
yeah,
I would say so. They're not very different. The way to think about it from our lens, at least as sequences lenses, you have three kinds of APIs. One
yeah.
that you are exposing externally, uh, right, for to interact with your customers, partners. They can be anywhere. They can be on-prem. They can be
Hmm.
in a cloud or a serverless environment. Doesn't really matter. But those APIs ultimately are creating more interactions internally, right? Like you could have a checkout application that is internally talking to another microservices internally. So APIs that are going side to side, they're not directly exposed to the outside world, but they are triggered because of external interactions, right?
Okay.
And and then the third aspect is APIs could be making callouts to other subsystems, like we spoke about Stripe, PayPal, checkout applications, whatever that might be. Now in the new world, LLMs as well, right? Like we could be interacting with it. And there are different approaches or different approaches to protect these, right? Like external interactions are the riskiest ones because you don't have a perimeter set out, right? Like, or those interactions might be poorly authenticated, they might be exposing sensitive information, so you need to think about them with highest priority, right? Because things, people, you're exposing it to the outside world, and those interactions needs to be protected with the highest priority. I think the internal APIs are more about posture, right? Like which are my, this is my PCI zone, non-PCI zones. This has customer data. This has health data, right? I need to know a catalog of those APIs, who's interacting with what, and can I create like small perimeters around those, right? The third aspect is external interactions, third party interactions that we spoke about, right? When I'm interacting with an AI or an LLM, when I'm interacting with a Stripe, right? What kind of information is leaving my environment and getting into these third party environments, right? Because ultimately you could be prone to a supply chain attack as well, right? Because if your data is residing somewhere else, I could attack that entity rather than you, because you have all the fort built around your environment, but not necessarily control over the other thing. So you have to assess it in these ways, But you will always live in a heterogeneous world, right? Like you will have different API gateways, you will have CDNs, you have load balancers, you have cloud native gateways that are out there. So you need to protect them all. You need to have a single pane of glass, but you can't live in a world that everything will flow through one gateway for me or one CDN for me. My on-prem will have a load balancer. My AWS environment or an Oracle environment might have a cloud native API gateway or a serverless environment. So you need to reorient yourself. How do I actually protect them in different environments? But the same thing applies. Where are my APIs? What risk are they posing? And are they being abused?
Uh, Maybe it's more technical. This question: can a WAF web application firewall can protect APIs, or do we need additional tools in place for protection?
Yeah, I mean, the name itself says it all. Web application firewall, right? And
Mhm.
will not do much for your APIs. And web application firewalls are good for syntactic abuse, like buffer
Okay.
overflow, SQL injections, and things like that. And they mostly apply towards web apps, right? And these interactions are API interaction, JSONs, XMLs, right?
Ajax, I suppose, because we have
Yeah,
also that
GraphQL,
part.
you name it, right? Like,
Yeah.
so that's one fundamental difference. The
Mhm.
second fundamental difference is the kinds of attacks to be also, right? The on like we said, I think David, you said that earlier, right? Like, think these are like the enablers of business, right?
Yeah.
And so these are business logic that you are actually exposing to the outside world. There's usually no syntactic abuse that happens here. Is the business logic abuse that happens. I'll iterate through gift card numbers. I'll try out. I'll get these $50 when I sign up for an account, right? So you have to understand the business and protect those assets based on that. So again, web application firewalls can't do much here, right? The second aspect around this, a similar thing, is traditional bot solutions, which relied on JavaScript and SDK to see, okay, let me send a JavaScript to a web browser, uh, see if there is a real graphics card being used. Is it running on real device or not, right? Those things no longer work in the API world because most of these interactions are B2B interactions. There's no room for a JavaScript or an SDK to be forced on the other end, right? So
Yeah.
again, those defenses don't work there as well.
Yeah, so kind of building upon the whole WAF and other things, so certainly you think of the API security, you got the making sure the APIs are authenticated, right? You know, things like that, and other things if there's actually vulnerability in that API itself. But what have you seen is, are we really seeing the heavier attacks on, the API sends a blob all the way down to the middleware, right? And, it's a deserialization issue or other things. Is that not the real challenge, I think, for some people with API security? It's not the API itself. It's the layers of depth that may behind that actual interface.
Yeah, it is, right? I mean, you could still have two or three interaction points. Ultimately, it's fanning out into hundreds, sometimes even thousands of microservices on the back, right? So think about, like, now your crown jewels could be sitting second or third layer deep, right? Right. You have to ultimately protect those assets, right? Like what's leaving, what's not, right? And the bad guys could be taking a multi-step approach as well, right? One thing could be a single API call. I was able to reach all the way in the back because I had to get like customer PII information, right? Because that gets rendered in your browser when you're getting to my accounts, right? So you could actually go directly or you could go indirectly, where I'll take a multi-step approach where I mean, you spoke about the serialization, deserialization. Those are like buffer overflows and things like that can definitely be used in those setups. You need to definitely protect around that. And a layer above it is also the business logic itself, right? Like, uh, what was this API designed to do, and is it really being used that way, or in the same sequence of events, and so on and so forth? Is it behaving the same way? Was it designed to just give out the customer information for that individual that asked for it? Or can somebody actually enumerate for different customer IDs, and the same user could get access to somebody else's data? So you have to worry about those aspects as well.
That's actually a good question to kind of go into, is how important is understanding the behavior of the threat actor with API attacks?
Extremely important. Like, I think we touched upon it briefly. Like, these kinds of attacks that we're seeing now, majority of them are actually business logic attacks, right? What we're seeing is you have to expose certain business logic, like, okay, checking the balance of a gift card. You have to expose it to the customer, right?
Yeah.
But is it being abused? How does a typical customer use that API? How many times does he actually use it, right? Like, how many gift cards will a customer really have, right? What time of the day does that API typically get used, right? How does a customer actually get to that API? Because I'll probably log in and get to my accounts, check for or add a gift card, right? There's a user journey. These are all about behaviors that we are talking about, as opposed to what syntactic abuse did I see here? Because all that guy is putting in is like a 16-digit number and trying it out. So that's why behavior is extremely critical, and every behavior or every API is different, and the
Yeah.
behaviors on how it actually gets executed or exercised is very, very different, right? So being able to understand those behaviors is critical. What's also interesting is the bad guys is this one thing that the bad guys don't have access to. Like, you as an enterprise know your user cohort, right? How your users actually behave. But bad guys don't understand that. They're going to reverse engineer your app, right? But they're going to try to hit that thing directly, as opposed to the rest of your population that actually uses that app for a legitimate purpose. So again, kind of think of it like that behavior aspect is extremely critical to differentiate between good versus bad.
That's great. Alex, Dave, did you have any questions? I know we're at 9:42. I just want to make sure we ask questions before.
I might have a question from the incident point of view. What should organization do in case API security was breached, let's say, or the information had been the data leak happens through that API? What do they have to do as a first step? What's they have to look for something like forensics, for example?
Absolutely. I think, again, it goes back to proper logging and proper asset management, right? Like, you might hear about it from a hacker directly. You might hear about, like, okay, your database landed up in some of these like dark web somewhere, right? Like, you might
Yeah,
hear,
forums. Yeah, I get it.
yeah. So, but then ultimately you have to know what was the source of this information, right? Like, if number one is real or not. So I think in some ways you should be doing, you should be managing these assets the same way you're managing others, right? Proper logging, proper authentication, authorization, right? Some internal UEBA like tools, right? Like who are looking at the behaviors and things like that, in terms of, okay, how much network traffic is flowing through, and like you will employ a traditional company that can help you understand like where this breach has happened. But then the next step would really be, okay, now this has happened, what do I need to do moving forward, right? Like, how do I contain this to not go beyond what has already been breached? So I think that's where you're going to start your journey around API security and protection as well.
Yeah.
Go
David?
ahead. Alex. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alex. I didn't mean to cut you off.
David, if you have some questions to add, or from my side, it's too many questions, I think.
I only have one last question to go aloud. Is there any training or learning recommendations you might make to the community in this area?
Um, yes, I think there are certain um, like I think there's still kind of so the two couple of frameworks. Like I think OWASP API security top 10 is a good place to start, like to get an understanding of what these API vulnerabilities really are and how I should actually tackle them. That becomes a starting point. I think most of the other ones are kind of vendor driven. Even you don't need to take the vendor aspect of things, but getting an understanding of what these breaches are, how I should be protecting it. So that's the other aspect, because we spoke about awareness is a big part of this, right? Like to be able to protect, I need to be aware of what these breaches are, how do they actually happen. Most of them right now are kind of, apart from the OWASP API top 10, are vendor-driven trainings and others that are out there. So those are the two that I can think of. I don't know if others can talk about some other places to get this information.
Oh,
Alex,
thanks for sharing.
Alex, you know any places or for that? I know you're
Sorry.
not. I know you're not the API expert, but
No. I'm not. But I've been involved in the pen testing things.
Pen testing is another good place. Yes.
Yeah, but more as a CISO when I was the BM at the bank at that time, and yeah, it was a lot. I could tell you a lot of things. Why? Because we identified for those applications, let's say not thousands, but maybe hundreds of APIs. And we discovered a lot of things in terms of exposing the information about the customers, or even about the financial, I'm sorry, not financial company, about the companies that were as a customer, let's say, not physical person, but also uh, companies. And yeah, we had to work a lot over there to fix all those kind of things, to put all the developers to check and to do another retest or another pen test in order for those things to be fixed. But in the banking sector, it's not taking let's say a day or a week. It takes maybe months to be fixed.
Yeah.
no, I
Yeah.
think this would be a good time. I know we have only about 15 minutes left. If you could kind of talk about sequence security, what you guys do, your solution, why it's unique compared to the other solutions out there, that'd be great.
Sure. From our lens, right? Like we solve for what typically customers reach out to us for, right? Like three things that we spoke about earlier: help you understand where your APIs are, right? And typically, uh, you have to start off with no integration needed, what's out there. Give me an attack surface view of things that is externally exposed. Like we saw, that's the most critical asset, right? That is like, where are they actually hosted? Are they on prem, in the cloud, which particular cloud? And you might say, oh, everything for me goes through a particular CDN, say Akamai, Cloudflare. That should be the case. The reality is, uh, you have a long tail of assets that are spread out in at least on an average 12 plus cloud environments, right? So knowing that becomes the starting point, and that's where we help you identify. And we can just start off with your top level domain name, and give you an asset inventory of where those assets, specifically APIs. So this is not a general purpose attack surface detection tool, but API attack surface detection tool. From those, you can say, okay, like how can I get to covering or protecting those APIs, at least 80% of that very, very quickly, right? So go after, once you know that, okay, this is in my particular cloud environment, let me integrate with that and create a catalog of those APIs again. So that becomes step number two, right? So let me catalog them, let me assess them from risks, right? Like which ones are sensitive, which ones have sensitive information flowing through it, which ones are properly authenticated. So we help you create that inventory in real time. And going back to that company that we spoke about before us, it took them a year and a half to catalog it, versus now it's continuous real time that is happening for them.
Yeah, I read about your spider saying that you could do it within minutes instead of
Minutes.
yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So that's the first phase, the discovery of all your assets, right? The next one is continuous compliance, right? Continuous compliance is like, which ones have sensitive PII, PCI, where are they actually hosted? Are they deviating from the spec or a contract with your developers or not, right? Which ones are shadow APIs that are exposing high risk stuff for you, right? So, and it could be at runtime as well as your development time in your CI/CD pipeline. So that's the second phase that we have there.
I
And
think-
so I call this the basic API security, and there are other vendors in the space that will also do that for you. But then ultimately, why do you care? You care about because you want to stop breaches. You want to care about uh, from stopping abuse around that, and just visibility is not enough. And that's where advanced API protection comes into play, which is again unique about us. Nobody else offers that. Um, because where others will stop at is, oh, I see weakness around it, but you stop using your existing WAF attacks
yeah.
on it, right? And we spoke about this earlier that WAFs are number one useless around protecting around APIs, right?
Yeah.
All they will offer at most is block using IP addresses. And we again spoke about this. The bad guys have access to millions of IP addresses, and you will always play catch up when you actually detect and protect you based on IP addresses. Right?
Yep.
That's where the advanced API threat protection that we offer comes into play, where we can actually detect using our machine learning and AI. Number one is the bad behaviors, differentiate between good versus bad behaviors, and then actually natively stop these attacks, not just based on IP addresses, but based on these behaviors.
Yep.
Right? So that's the full journey. You can start from anywhere. You can start with let me get in an API attack surface view. I don't even know if there's abuse going on because I don't know what APIs do I have to begin with. You can
Yeah.
obviously start there, but everybody's goal is the same, and we are a single platform that can actually provide you with full journey in protecting your APIs.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead,
can't
David.
jumping in is that we got a question from the famous Tom Jones there, right? And asking about the Tom Jones is he's a very unique person and very insightful. Learned many things from him over the years, but his question was like, "Hey, should should a CISO or use a red team to attack assets? I don't know if I would call it attack, but I say is evaluate, penetrate, right, and determine gaps, right? So absolutely, I think pen testing and red teams are critical for most organizations. If you don't have, you're not large enough to have it yourself. I think it's how you outsource that and having that. But I think it's a critical function that needs to be performed for most of your assets, in my experience.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, David. I think one challenge that most teams, pen testing teams face around APIs is they don't know what to test because APIs are unique to every environment. And that's the other place where we can actually help generate these specs for pen testers. Right? Okay, these are the assets. This is what the request and response actually looks like. And now you can go in and build your pen testing program around that. So, but great question. You need to have a red team to be able to test that. And these are critical assets that you should always be testing.
And I think we only got 6 more minutes left. But what is the best way to contact you if people want more information or they want to see a demo? How do they reach you?
Yeah, a couple of ways. Obviously, you can get to us through our website, www.sequence.ai. And we can even do a quick assessment for you, like a free assessment we offer. Again, from the website, you can get there, sign up for API Spider tool that you briefly spoke about,
Yep.
and we can give you an API attack surface view. And we can interact with you as well, like specific problems or that you're trying to solve for as well.
Awesome. Other gentlemen, do you guys have any other questions?
Not from my side, thank you.
Yeah, it's been a great, insightful conversation. I just put on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, learned a few things myself every time.
Interesting, I could say.
Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation.
For me, API it's not something new, but all the time you hear different stories, different things, and so on. As I says, I'm not an API expert. If you want to speak about GRC, always I'm open about governance, risk, and compliance. But in terms of API, I'm not the best person. As I says, I just check reports and then I come with what needs to be done in terms of fixing those vulnerabilities and risk that I identify.
Well, Shreyans, thank you so much for your time. David, thank you again, like always, for your time. Alex, of course, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Everybody joined. This is going to be recorded. LinkedIn, I think, keeps it up for, I think it's like a year, which is great. So we'll be able to do views after this. We're also going to put it on our YouTube channel too, and we'll promote it that way. And again, everyone, thank you so much for your time. It was great speaking with everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Aaron, for building the community.
Thank you so much, everyone, for
Thank you.
joining.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.